back to Necessary News, a show that brings you what you need to know around the globe, at home, and on the go. Today, in Boston, our most recent killer on the loose isn't what you might think. It's quick, it's heavy, and it's deceptively sweet. That's right, we're talking about molasses. This past week, on January 15th, a molasses tank erupted on the north side of Boston, killing 21 civilians, many of which being government workers, and injuring another 150. The Purity Distilling Company is rightfully under significant fire from this situation, and our reporters have gotten key representatives of this story to speak their opinion and get to the bottom of what this flood is all about.
Hello, I'm Samantha Zanti, and I'm the CEO of Purity Distilling. I oversee operations of the company and work closely with the lead executives to perform the major business tasks of the company. First and foremost, the Great Molasses Flood is an absolute tragedy, and from the bottoms of our hearts, we support the families of those lost and the cleanup of Boston. As for the events on January 15th, there's obviously a lot to think about from a management perspective. Because I am not constantly on the distillery floor, there are many questions I am searching for the answers of. The first is obviously whoever was on the factory floor when the tank collapsed. We are asking questions and finding out the specifics on operation during the afternoon shift on the 15th. We are thinking about our shift workers as well as what management decisions were made that could have prevented the rupture of the tank or, and God forbid, what decisions ended up directly causing this disaster. Currently, the biggest allegation against our company is the sheer amount of molasses and the great amounts of devastation it caused. As known to the public, our company has a large hand in alcohol production, and we are currently trying to beat out what is now the inevitable passing of the 18th Amendment. Molasses production is in high demand, and that is something our company is trying to solve in the greater Boston area. Unfortunately, this more rapid production may have caused some small but catastrophic errors in the purity distilling processes. Obviously, due to confidentiality, I cannot go into greater detail, but the faults of our own company's processes are being currently looked into. Finally, as upper management, I am obviously searching for the root cause of this eruption, and I'm therefore going back to the beginning. While we don't have much information, we are looking into talking with our construction team that manufactured the tanks to look for slight errors in both construction and assembly. Obviously, here at Purity Distilling, we are working hard with those affected, the city, and the cleanup crew to make our community as it was again. Our top priority is to still produce the finest ethanol for Americans until we can't anymore.
Good afternoon, I am Abigail Toish, Boston City environmentalist. My primary focus is on how our environment is affected by manufacturing companies and human involvement. The Great Molasses Flood has created both an impact on our lives and the environment. After much analysis on the tragic events that took place on January 15th, the Boston Molasses Flood has raised red flags for the well-being of our environment. We are still looking into the long-term effects of the flood. Our first matter of business revolves around the cleanup of this sticky substance. Molasses is built of the chemical compound C6H12O6, better yet known as glucose. This substance is messy and sticky and difficult to work with. We will need to begin research and analysis about what common compound can break down this sticky substance in an efficient and environmentally friendly way. We have begun exploration on what buildings and nearby an architecture has been damaged, demolished, and affected. Our primary focus at this time is the citizens of Boston and how our wildlife in the harbor may be affected. Many townspeople rely on the harbor for food as well as a job. The production of molasses also a highly employed company, making the flood much worse. As lead environmentalist, I will continue my efforts toward the greater cause, making it my priority to protect our environment and its citizens. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jordan Wright, Boston City's People and Human Factor Engineer. My main focus is how our people were affected by this devastating tragedy. Looking around at the damage that this sticky situation caused, it also took a huge impact on my fellow people of Boston City. It has killed 21 people and left 150 injured. The sticky situation was something else. The smell around the city lingered for decades, causing the safety around to go down. A 40-foot tall wave that went rushing through our city, shattered homes and several businesses. Cleanup crews spent an estimated 87,000 work hours cleaning streets, buildings, trains, and everything else that sticky molasses touched. Unfortunately, most of the deceased were laborers and drivers working at the North End paving yard and Copes Hill Wharf. The sad news that comes to us is they did not recover the last victim from the harbor until May 12th, remembering that this did take place on January 15th. As the leader of the people of Boston City, I will continue my job of making sure our people are safe and nothing like this takes a toll on the city's amazing people.
Hello, I'm Chase Thompson, Boston City financialist. My objective is to look at how the economy could have created such a disastrous event such as this. There is a lot to talk about, so let's get started. First of all, let's talk about one of the biggest events that was going on at the time of the incident: Prohibition. The 18th Amendment, the law prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol, was to be put in place on January 16, 1919. That was one day after the collapse of the Molasses tankard. That might not make much sense. Why would the passing of Prohibition have anything to do with the molasses flood? Well, molasses can be fermented to make ethanol, which is the alcohol in alcohol. This means that the Purity Distilling Company was trying to beat Prohibition. They were trying to get as much alcohol they could before it was banned. This led to an excess amount of molasses in the tankard, and ultimately, its failure. Now, let's go back a few years. In 1915, the demands for alcohol started rising dramatically, as well as the demands for dynamite and other explosives, as this was right in the middle of World War I. To meet these rising demands, the molasses tank was very quickly built. The speed that it was built at led to negligence in the creation of it. So the thickness of the metal was not right, the material was inadequate, and the rivets were designed very poorly. You might wonder how the Purity Distilling Company could get away with such an unsafe building. But at that time, there were little to no regulations on building plans. If there were, they were rarely enforced, so Purity Distilling could easily get away with the unsafe building. But there is a positive to this incident. Due to the collapse of the tankard, the U.S. created strict regulations on the design and development of buildings, which leads to a safer nation and less engineering disasters like this. Lastly, let's talk some more about money. The devastation of the flood caused about $7 million in damages to the buildings and the Boston Harbor, which is about $100 million today. This does not take into account the countless hours that many first responders put in. Due to the amount of deaths and properties damaged, Purity Distilling Company paid $1 million in restitution to the poor families affected by the flood, which is about $15 million today. Thanks for listening. I hope I was able to inform you on the financial causes and effects of the Boston molasses disaster.
It's more than interesting to hear all of these sides of the Great Molasses Flood story. Getting down to the bottom of what happened is going to be a tough process for both investigators and those involved to figure out. So far, local residents have filed a class action lawsuit against the United States Industrial Alcohol Company for damages and lives lost. Thank you to our first responders, including cadets from Massachusetts Nautical School, led by Lieutenant Commander H.J. Copeland. We will continue to update on this story as things change and a root cause is found. Now, back to Necessary News Headquarters.